The rain was coming down hard that November night, the kind of cold rain that soaks right through your clothes and chills you to the bone. Robert stood behind the counter of his small Italian restaurant, wiping down the espresso machine for what felt like the 100th time that day. It was almost 10 o'clock, way past closing time, but he was in no hurry to go home to his empty apartment. 6 months had passed since the divorce, and the silence of that place still felt suffocating. At least here, surrounded by the smell of garlic and tomato sauce, he could pretend everything was normal. Well, as normal as things could be when your restaurant was barely staying afloat and you were one bad month away from closing the doors forever. He was just about to flip the sign to closed when he saw them through the front window. An old woman and a little boy, both soaked through, standing under the small awning by his door. The woman was thin, her gray hair plastered to her face, and she was holding the child close to her, trying to shield him from the wind. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, and even from inside, Robert could see he was shivering. Robert hesitated. He knew he should just lock up and leave through the back. The neighborhood had changed over the years, and you learned not to get involved. But something about the way the old woman held that child, so protective and gentle, made him pause. Before he could talk himself out of it, he walked to the door and opened it. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were tired, ringed with dark circles. But there was a dignity in the way she held herself, despite being drenched and obviously desperate. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice hoarse. "I know you're closed. We just need to wait out the rain for a bit. We'll stand right here by the door. We won't be any trouble." Robert looked at the boy. The kid's lips had a bluish tint, and his whole body was trembling. His shoes were falling apart, and Robert could see his socks were wet through the holes. "Come inside," Robert heard himself say. "You'll freeze out there." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll just sit quietly until the rain stops." Robert stepped aside and let them in. The old woman guided the boy to the nearest booth, and they sat down carefully, as if afraid to take up too much space. Water dripped from their clothes onto the floor. "When did you two last eat?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer from the hollow look in their eyes. The woman opened her mouth to say something, probably to lie and say they were fine, but the boy's stomach growled loudly in the quiet restaurant. She closed her eyes, embarrassed. "Wait here," Robert said. He went back to the kitchen and pulled out containers of leftover pasta from the dinner service. There was chicken parmigiana, garlic bread, and some minestrone soup that was still warm. He heated everything up and brought it out on real plates, not take-out containers. They were in his restaurant. They deserved to be treated like customers. The boy's eyes went wide when he saw the food. The old woman put her hand on his arm, stopping him from diving right in. "What do we say?" she whispered to him. "Thank you, sir," the boy said, his voice small. "You're welcome, buddy. Eat up. There's plenty more if you want it." Robert sat down at the counter, pretending to do paperwork while they ate. He didn't want to make them uncomfortable by watching, but he couldn't help glancing over. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, and the old woman kept making sure the boy got the biggest pieces of chicken. When they were done, she brought the plates to the counter herself. "You didn't have to do that," Robert said. "It's the least I can do. You've been so kind." She paused, looking down. "I'm Dorothy, and this is my grandson, Tommy." "Robert. Nice to meet you both." There was an awkward silence. The rain was still pounding against the windows, showing no signs of letting up. Dorothy glanced at the clock on the wall, then at Tommy, who was trying hard to keep his eyes open. "I should be honest with you," she said quietly. "We don't have anywhere to go tonight. The shelters are full. I called every single one. We've been walking since this morning when our car broke down on 5th Street. I don't have money to fix it, and even if I did, we've been living in it for the past 3 weeks. Robert felt something twist in his chest. What happened? Dorothy's hands gripped the edge of the counter. My daughter, Tommy's mother, she passed away 8 months ago. Cancer. It happened so fast. One day she was fine. The next, she was in the hospital. And then she was gone. The medical bills took everything. I was working as a librarian at Jefferson Elementary, but they cut my position in September due to budget problems. I couldn't keep up with the rent. By the time I realized how bad things had gotten, we were being evicted. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm not asking for money. I just needed to get Tommy out of the rain. He's been such a brave boy through all of this, never complaining. But he's just a baby. He shouldn't have to live like this. Robert looked over at Tommy, who had fallen asleep in the booth, his head resting on the table. Something in his chest cracked open. He thought about his own problems, his divorce, his struggling business, the loneliness. But at least he had a roof over his head. At least he had options. I have a storage room upstairs, he said, before he could think better of it. It's not much, just where I keep extra supplies and old equipment. But there's space to sleep, and it's warm and dry. You can stay there tonight. Dorothy's hands flew to her mouth. Oh my God, are you serious? Yeah, I mean, it's just for tonight, just until you figure something out. Even as he said it, Robert wondered what he was getting himself into. But looking at that sleeping child, he knew he couldn't send them back out into the rain. I don't know what to say, Dorothy whispered. You've already done so much. Come on, let me show you. Robert led them upstairs to the storage room. He cleared some boxes and pulled out a couple of old tablecloths for them to lie on. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than a car or a sidewalk. He found some clean kitchen towels they could use to dry off. The bathroom is just down the hall, he said, and if you need anything, I'll be downstairs for another hour doing the books. Dorothy carried Tommy in, and the boy barely stirred. She laid him down gently on the makeshift bed and covered him with her jacket. Thank you, she said again, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means. You're a good man, Robert. Robert didn't feel like a good man. He felt like someone who was barely holding his own life together. But as he went back downstairs and looked around his restaurant, something felt different. The place didn't seem quite as empty as it had an hour ago. He locked the front door and turned off most of the lights, leaving just one on in the kitchen in case Dorothy or Tommy needed to come down. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd help them figure out what to do next. Tomorrow he'd make some calls, find them some real help. But tonight, at least they'd be warm and safe. Robert didn't know it then. But that one simple decision to open his door would change everything. Not just for Dorothy and Tommy, but for him too. Sometimes the people you help end up being the ones who save you. But that lesson was still to come. For now, it was just a rainy night, a struggling restaurant owner, and two people who desperately needed a place to stay. Robert woke up the next morning with a knot in his stomach. He'd barely slept, tossing and turning in his apartment, wondering if he'd made a huge mistake. What if Dorothy and Tommy had stolen from the restaurant? What if they'd trashed the place? He grabbed his keys and drove to the restaurant faster than usual, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But when he walked through the back door at 6 in the morning, he stopped dead in his tracks. The kitchen was spotless, not just clean, but actually organized. The counters were wiping down, the floor had been mopped, and all his pots and pans were arranged by size on the shelves. Even the grease stains he'd been ignoring for months were gone. Dorothy was standing at the sink, washing the last of the dishes from the night before. She turned when she heard him come in, and her face flushed with embarrassment. "I hope you don't mind," she said quickly. "I couldn't sleep, and I wanted to do something to thank you. You've been so kind to us." Robert walked around the kitchen, stunned. "You did all this? It's really nothing. I also organized the storage area upstairs. You had a lot of supplies mixed together, and some of the older items were buried in the back. I made a list of what you have so you don't accidentally order duplicates." She handed him a neatly written inventory list. Robert scanned it, his eyes widening. He'd been meaning to do this for months, but never found the time. Or the energy, if he was being honest. "Where's Tommy?" he asked. "Still sleeping upstairs. Poor thing was exhausted." Dorothy dried her hands on a towel. "I know we said just one night. We'll get out of your way as soon as he wakes up. You've done more than enough for us." Robert was about to agree, to tell her he'd make some calls to social services, when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Pedro, his dishwasher. The message was short and blunt. "Can't come in. Got the flu. Probably out all week." Robert felt his blood pressure spike. Pedro was reliable, never missed a shift. And now he was going to be gone for a week? They had a busy lunch service coming up, and he was already short-staffed since his prep cook had quit 2 days ago via text message. Just stopped showing up and sent a message saying he found a better-paying job. He looked at Dorothy, an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy. He barely knew this woman, but he was desperate, and she'd already proven she could work. "Can you use a commercial dishwasher?" he asked. Dorothy blinked. "Yes. I worked in a school cafeteria for a few years before I became a librarian." "Why?" "My dishwasher just called in sick. I have lunch service starting in a few hours, and I'm completely on my own. If you're willing to help out today, I can pay you in cash plus meals for you and Tommy, and you can stay another night upstairs." Dorothy's eyes went wide. "Are you serious?" "Yes. Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever you need." "You sure? It's hard work. Hot, steamy, and the lunch rush gets crazy." "I'm tougher than I look," Dorothy said with a small smile, "and I'm grateful for the chance." That day, Robert learned that Dorothy wasn't just tough. She was incredible. She moved through the kitchen with efficiency, washing dishes faster than Pedro ever had. But more than that, she paid attention. When he was scrambling to prep vegetables because his cook had quit, she jumped in without being asked. Her knife skills were surprisingly good, and she worked without complaint. During a brief lull between lunch and dinner service, Robert found her reorganizing his walk-in cooler, grouping items by type and moving older stock to the front. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know. But it'll save you time later. You've got some items in here that are about to expire. If you use them in tonight's specials, you won't waste money." Robert looked at the items she'd pulled out. She was right. He'd completely forgotten about that produce. "You've done this before, haven't you? More than just cafeteria work." Dorothy shrugged. "I pay attention, that's all." But it was more than that. Over the next few days, as Robert asked Dorothy to stay on while Pedro recovered, he noticed things. Small changes that made a big difference. She'd rearranged the prep station so everything was within easier reach. She'd created a simple system for tracking what needed to be ordered. She even suggested switching to a different produce supplier who offered better prices for the same quality. "How do you know all this?" Robert asked one evening after closing. Dorothy was quiet for a moment, wiping down the last table. Tommy was in the corner, drawing with some crayons Dorothy had found in a drawer. "I went to culinary school," she finally said. "A long time ago, when I was young. I wanted to be a chef. I even worked in a few restaurants in my 20s. What happened? Life happened. I got married, had my daughter. My husband wanted me to have a more stable job, something with regular hours and benefits. So I went back to school and became a librarian. It was a good career. I don't regret it. But I never stopped thinking about food, about restaurants, about how they work." She smiled sadly. "Funny how life turns out, isn't it? Here I am, back in a kitchen, but as a dishwasher instead of a chef." Robert felt a pang in his chest. There was something deeply wrong about someone with Dorothy's knowledge and work ethic living in a storage room and washing dishes for cash. That night he lay awake again, but this time for different reasons. His restaurant was running better than it had in months, maybe years. Dorothy had been there less than a week, and already everything felt more organized, more efficient. He actually had time to breathe during service instead of constantly running around putting out fires. But it was more than just the practical help. Having Dorothy and Tommy around made the restaurant feel alive again. Tommy would sit at a booth after school, doing homework or drawing pictures. Dorothy would bring him snacks and help with his reading. Regular customers had started noticing them, asking questions. Robert had simply said they were family helping out for a while, and no one questioned it. The truth was, his own family had never helped like this. His ex-wife had hated the restaurant, called it his mistress, said he cared more about pasta than their marriage. Maybe she'd been right. But Dorothy understood. She saw what he was trying to build here. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after that rainy night, Robert came in early to find Dorothy teaching Tommy how to crack eggs. The boy was concentrating hard, his tongue sticking out as he tried not to get shells in the bowl. "Good job, sweetheart," Dorothy was saying. "Now we whisk them like this." Robert watched them for a moment, something warm spreading through his chest. When Dorothy looked up and saw him, she started to apologize, but he held up his hand. "I have a proposition," he said. "Pedro's coming back tomorrow, but my prep cook position is still open. I can't pay a lot, but it's a real job with real wages. And I've been thinking, that storage room upstairs, I could actually convert it into a small apartment. Nothing fancy, but it would be yours. You and Tommy could stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." Dorothy's whisk clattered into the bowl. "Robert, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. And honestly, it's selfish on my part. This place runs better with you here. You've made more improvements in a week than I've made in a year." Tears rolled down Dorothy's cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll help me save this restaurant while I help you get back on your feet." "It's not charity, Dorothy. It's partnership." Tommy tugged on his grandmother's sleeve. "Can we stay, Grandma? Please? I like it here. And Mr. Robert makes really good spaghetti." Dorothy laughed through her tears and pulled Tommy into a hug. Then she looked at Robert and nodded. "Yes, we'll stay. And thank you. For everything." Robert smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. He had no idea that this was just the beginning, that Dorothy had secrets and talents she hadn't even shared yet. All he knew was that for the first time since his divorce, his restaurant felt like home again. 3 weeks had passed since Dorothy and Tommy moved into the small apartment above the restaurant. Robert had kept his word, fixing up the storage room with a proper bed, a small table, and even a tiny bathroom. It wasn't much, but Dorothy had made it cozy with second-hand curtains and some plants from the dollar store. The restaurant was doing better, too. Not great, but better. They were getting more regular customers, and Robert wasn't lying awake at night anymore, wondering how he'd make rent. Dorothy had streamlined everything, and her suggestions kept saving him money in ways he'd never thought about. But something was bothering him. Every night after closing, Dorothy would disappear upstairs for an hour or two. He could hear her moving around in the kitchen late at night, and sometimes he'd smell something sweet, like vanilla or cinnamon. But when he'd come in the next morning, there was never any evidence of what she'd been doing. One Thursday night, Robert decided to stay late to work on the books. Around 11 o'clock, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Dorothy appeared in the kitchen doorway, clearly not expecting to see him there. "Oh, I thought you'd gone home," she said, looking flustered. "Just finishing up some paperwork. What are you doing up?" "I couldn't sleep. I was just going to make some tea." But Robert noticed she was holding something behind her back. "What's that?" Dorothy hesitated, then slowly brought her hands forward. She was holding a plate covered with a kitchen towel. "I've been baking," she admitted quietly. "I know I should have asked permission to use the kitchen. I'm sorry. I've been replacing anything I use, and I only work when we're closed." I just needed something to do with my hands. It helps me think. Can I see? Dorothy pulled back the towel and Robert's jaw dropped. On the plate were 6 perfect cream puffs. Golden and delicate, dusted with powdered sugar. Next to them were small fruit tarts that looked like they belonged in a fancy bakery window. "You made these?" Robert asked, though the answer was obvious. "It's just something I do. It's been so long, I wasn't sure if I still remembered how." Robert picked up one of the cream puffs and took a bite. The pastry was light and crispy, the cream inside smooth and perfectly sweet. It was honestly the best thing he'd ever tasted. "Dorothy, this is incredible. This is better than anything I've ever had in any bakery." She waved her hand dismissively. "You're being kind." "I'm serious. How long have you been making these?" "A few weeks now. I started the first week we were here. I'd make small batches after Tommy went to sleep. It relaxes me." She paused, looking down. "Before my daughter got sick, I used to bake for her and Tommy all the time. Cookies, cakes, pies, it was our thing. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to do it anymore. But being here, in this kitchen, it felt safe to try again." Robert sat down, his mind racing. "You said you went to culinary school. Was baking your focus?" "Pastry arts, actually. I graduated top of my class." Dorothy smiled at the memory. "I worked at a French restaurant downtown for 3 years. The chef there trained in Paris, and he taught me everything. But then I got pregnant with my daughter, and my husband at the time didn't think restaurant hours were suitable for a mother. So I stopped." "That was 40 years ago?" 38, but yes." "And you can still do this?" Robert gestured at the perfect pastries on the plate. "It's like riding a bike." "I suppose. Your hands remember even when your mind doubts." Robert stood up and started pacing. "Dorothy, do you know how much people pay for pastries like this? There's a bakery 2 blocks from here that charges $6 for a single cream puff, and theirs aren't half as good as these." "What are you thinking?" Dorothy asked cautiously. "I'm thinking my restaurant doesn't have a dessert menu. We just serve store-bought tiramisu and cannoli from a supplier. What if we changed that? What if we offered real, homemade desserts?" Dorothy's eyes widened. "Robert, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't need charity." "This isn't charity. This is business." Robert grabbed a notepad and started scribbling numbers. "Look, I'll buy the ingredients. You make the desserts. We'll start small, just weekend specials. If they sell, we split the profit 60-40. That's not fair to you?" 60-40 in your favor," Robert clarified. "You're doing the skilled work. I'm just providing the space and the customers." Dorothy sat down slowly, staring at the pastries on the plate. "What if people don't like them? What if I've lost my touch?" "Are you kidding? I just ate heaven in pastry form. Dorothy, this could really help the restaurant, and it could help you save up money, get back on your feet properly." "Can I think about it?" "Of course, but try something for me. Make a small batch of whatever you want this week. We'll offer them as a special on Saturday night on the house, just to see what people say. If nobody likes them, we'll forget the whole thing." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Okay, I can do that." That Saturday, Dorothy made 24 assorted pastries, cream puffs, fruit tarts, chocolate eclairs, and small lemon cakes. Robert put them out on the dessert cart without much fanfare, just a small sign that said, "Chef's Special Pastries." The first customer to try one was Mrs. Chen, a regular who came in every weekend with her husband. She took one bite of a lemon cake and her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she said. "Where did you get these?" "We made them here," Robert said proudly, "our pastry chef." "You have a pastry chef now? Since when?" Mrs. Chen took another bite. "This is unbelievable. It tastes like the pastries I had in France last year, but somehow better." By the end of the night, every single pastry was gone. Customers were asking if they could pre-order some for the next weekend. One man even asked for Dorothy's business card. Dorothy stood in the kitchen afterward, surrounded by empty plates, looking stunned. "They really liked them," she whispered. "Liked them?" "Dorothy, people were fighting over the last eclair. Mrs. Patterson tried to bribe me with $20 to save her a cream puff." For the first time since Robert had met her, Dorothy laughed, really laughed. It was a beautiful sound. "So, we're doing this?" she asked. "We're definitely doing this." Over the next 2 weeks, Dorothy developed a rotating dessert menu. She'd make different items each weekend, always something special. Word started to spread. Customers would call ahead to ask what desserts would be available. Some people started coming to the restaurant specifically for dessert, ordering a coffee and one of Dorothy's creations. Robert watched his dinner reservations increase by 30%. People were staying longer, ordering more, and most importantly, they were talking about his restaurant. He'd overhear conversations at tables about that amazing pastry chef and, "You have to try the chocolate tart." One evening, a woman in her 30s came in with a camera and a notepad. She introduced herself as a food blogger who'd heard about the desserts from a friend. "Would it be okay if I took some photos and maybe talk to your pastry chef?" she asked. Robert found Dorothy in the kitchen, carefully piping cream into eclairs. When he told her about the blogger, she looked terrified. "I can't talk to a blogger. What if I say something stupid?" "You're not going to say anything stupid. Just tell her about your pastries." "You know them better than anyone." Dorothy agreed reluctantly. Robert watched as she spoke with the blogger, her nervousness gradually fading as she talked about the techniques she used, the importance of quality ingredients, the French methods she'd learned decades ago. The blogger was scribbling furiously in her notebook, her eyes bright with interest. 3 days later, the blog post went live. The headline read, "Hidden Gem Alert, Downtown Restaurant Serves Pastries That Rival the City's Best." The article praised Dorothy's skill and mentioned that she was a formerly homeless grandmother who'd found her way back to her passion. Robert's phone started ringing off the hook with reservation requests. His email inbox filled up with people asking about the desserts, about Dorothy's story, about whether they could order whole cakes for special occasions. Dorothy came downstairs that morning with Tommy, holding her phone with trembling hands. "Robert, have you seen this? It's everywhere. People are sharing it on social media." "I know. We're fully booked for the next 2 weekends." Dorothy sat down, looking overwhelmed. "This is really happening, isn't it?" "This is really happening," Robert confirmed. "Your desserts are saving this restaurant, Dorothy. You're not just getting back on your feet. You're building something amazing." Tommy hugged his grandmother tight. "I told you your cakes were the best, Grandma." Dorothy kissed the top of his head, tears in her eyes. But these weren't sad tears anymore. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of a future that was suddenly looking bright again. Robert felt it too. His struggling restaurant was coming back to life, and it was all because he'd opened his door on a rainy night 3 months ago. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. The next 6 weeks felt like a dream. Robert's restaurant went from barely surviving to actually thriving. The phone rang constantly with reservations. People lined up on Friday and Saturday nights hoping to get a table, and everyone, absolutely everyone, wanted to try Dorothy's desserts. Robert had to hire 2 more servers just to keep up with the demand. The dining room was full almost every night, and for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't worried about making payroll. He wasn't worried about the rent. He was actually making a profit. Dorothy was working harder than ever, but she seemed happier too. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning to start baking, preparing dozens of pastries before the restaurant even opened. Her hands were always covered in flour, and she had a permanent smile on her face. Even Tommy seemed lighter, more like a regular kid instead of one carrying the weight of the world on his small shoulders. One Tuesday afternoon, a reporter from the local newspaper came by to do a story. She interviewed Robert and Dorothy, took photos of the kitchen, and watched Dorothy work her magic with cream and chocolate. The article came out that Sunday with a big photo of Dorothy holding one of her famous cream puffs. The headline read, "From Homeless to Head Pastry Chef, One Woman's Inspiring Journey." After that article, things got even crazier. A morning show called Wanting to Do a Segment. A food magazine wanted to feature the restaurant in their next issue. Dorothy's story had touched something in people. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about second chances, about not giving up, about how life could turn around when you least expected it. Robert sat down with Dorothy one evening after closing, his calculator and a stack of papers spread out on the table between them. "We need to talk," he said. Dorothy's face went pale. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Too right, actually. Look at these numbers." He turned the papers toward her. "Revenue is up 43% from 2 months ago. We're making more money than we ever have. And it's because of you." "It's because of both of us," Dorothy corrected. "You gave me this chance." "Maybe, but you're the one doing the work. And I think it's time we made this official." Robert pulled out another paper, this one with the header of a law office. "I talked to a lawyer. I want to make you a partner in the restaurant. Not just the pastry chef, an actual partner, equal ownership." Dorothy's hands flew to her mouth. "Robert, I can't accept that." "Why not? You've earned it. This place was dying before you got here. Now it's alive. You saved it, Dorothy. You saved me too, if I'm being honest. After my divorce, I didn't care about anything. But watching you fight to rebuild your life, watching you pour your heart into those pastries, it reminded me why I opened this restaurant in the first place." Tears rolled down Dorothy's cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Be my partner. We'll change the name to something that includes both of us. We'll expand the dessert menu, maybe even think about opening a second location someday." Dorothy wiped her eyes and looked at the papers. "Can I think about it for a day? This is huge." "Take all the time you need." But their conversation was interrupted by a loud knock on the front door. Robert looked up, annoyed. They were clearly closed. The lights were dim, and the sign was flipped. "Ignore it," he said. "They can see we're closed." But the knocking continued, louder and more insistent. Finally, Robert stood up and went to the door. Through the glass, he could see a man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit, looking impatient. Robert opened the door a crack. "We're closed. We open tomorrow at 11. "I'm not here to eat," the man said. "I'm looking for Dorothy Hanson." Robert felt his stomach tighten. Something about this man's tone was off. "Who's asking?" "I'm her brother, Frank. I saw the article in the paper. Is she here?" Dorothy had come up behind Robert. When she heard the voice, all the color drained from her face. "Frank," she said quietly. "There you are." Frank pushed past Robert into the restaurant without being invited. "Nice setup you got here. Reading the paper, it sounds like you're doing pretty well for yourself." "What do you want?" Dorothy's voice was cold in a way Robert had never heard before. "Is that any way to greet your brother? I haven't seen you in what? 5 years? 6? 7. And there was a reason for that." Frank looked around the restaurant, his eyes calculating. "Look, I'm not here to fight. I just think it's interesting that you're making all this money now, living in a nice place. When you owe me $15,000? Robert stepped forward. "Excuse me?" "This is between me and my sister," Frank said sharply. "Actually, this is my restaurant, so it's my business too." Robert crossed his arms. "Dorothy doesn't owe you anything." Frank laughed, a harsh sound. "Really? Did she tell you about the loan I gave her back in 2018? 15 grand to help with her rent when she was struggling? She said she'd pay me back, and she never did." Dorothy's hands were shaking. "That's not what happened. You came to me asking for money for your business, your failed business. I gave you $15,000 from my retirement savings because you said you'd pay me back in 6 months. That was 7 years ago, Frank. You never paid me a single cent. I don't remember it that way. Of course you don't. Just like you don't remember borrowing money from Mom before she died. Just like you don't remember stealing from Dad's wallet when we were teenagers. Dorothy's voice was rising. I gave you that money because you were my brother and I loved you. And you disappeared. You didn't come to my daughter's funeral. You didn't call when I lost my job. You didn't care that Tommy and I were living in a car, but now that you see I'm doing okay, now you show up? Frank's face reddened. That money was a loan, Dorothy. You owe me. I don't owe you anything. Get out. Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. We'll see what they say about someone who doesn't pay their debts. Robert had heard enough. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. You want the police? Let's call them. We can all go down to the station and you can explain why you're harassing a woman in her place of business. Frank looked at the phone, then at Robert, then at Dorothy. For a moment, it seemed like he might do something stupid. But then he backed toward the door. This isn't over, he said. People deserve to know what kind of person you really are, Dorothy. Maybe I'll talk to that newspaper reporter. Tell her the real story. The real story is that you're a con artist who preys on his own family, Dorothy said, her voice steady now despite the tears on her face. And if you come near me or Tommy or this restaurant again, I will call the police. I have a lawyer now. I have people who care about me. I'm not alone anymore, Frank. So whatever game you're trying to play, it won't work. Frank stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Dorothy collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. Robert sat down next to her and put his hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry you had to see that. I should have known he'd show up eventually. He always does when he thinks there's money involved. You have nothing to apologize for. He's the one who should be ashamed. What if he goes to the newspapers? What if he ruins everything we've built? He won't. And even if he tries, the truth is on your side. Everyone who knows you can see what kind of person you are. Robert squeezed her shoulder gently. You stood up to him, Dorothy. That took courage. Dorothy wiped her eyes. I've spent so many years being afraid of losing everything, afraid of not being enough, afraid of being alone. But standing here now, in this restaurant with you supporting me and Tommy safe upstairs, I realized I'm not that person anymore. Frank can't hurt me. Not really, because I've already survived the worst things life can throw at me. A bully of a brother is nothing compared to losing my daughter, to being homeless, to wondering if I could keep my grandson fed. You're stronger than you know, Robert said. So are you. You took a chance on a stranger and her grandson. Not many people would do that. They sat in silence for a while, the restaurant quiet around them. Finally, Dorothy picked up the partnership papers from the table. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes, I'll be your partner. Let's do this right. Let's build something real together. Robert smiled, feeling something warm spread through his chest. Partners? Partners, Dorothy agreed, shaking his hand. Outside, the city lights twinkled through the restaurant windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new possibilities. But tonight, two people who'd both lost their way had found something worth fighting for. They'd found each other, and they'd found hope, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. 4 months had passed since Frank's visit, and he never did go to the newspapers. Dorothy suspected he'd realized that his story wouldn't hold up under scrutiny, or maybe he just moved on to his next scheme. Either way, she stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. The partnership papers were signed, and the restaurant had a new name now, Robert and Dorothy's. It was simple, honest, and it felt right. They'd had a small party the day they unveiled the new sign, and half the neighborhood showed up to celebrate. Mrs. Chen brought champagne. Tommy cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors, grinning so wide his face looked like it might split in half. The dessert business had grown so much that they were running out of space. Dorothy was baking from 4 in the morning until noon just to keep up with demand. They had regular customers who came in 3 times a week. They had people calling from 2 towns over, asking if they could place special orders for birthdays and anniversaries. One evening, Robert sat down with Dorothy after the dinner rush, a familiar, excited look on his face. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's always dangerous," Dorothy teased, but she was smiling. "The space next door, the old bookstore that closed down last year. It's still empty. What if we expanded, turned it into a proper bakery? You'd have a real kitchen, professional equipment, space to work. We could sell your pastries retail, not just to restaurant customers." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Robert, that's a huge investment." "I know, but look at what we've done in 6 months. We went from barely surviving to having a waiting list for weekend reservations. The bank is willing to give us a loan. We have the customer base. And honestly, Dorothy, you're working yourself to the bone trying to keep up with demand in that little kitchen. You deserve proper space." "What about the risk? What if it doesn't work?" "What if it does?" Robert leaned forward. 6 months ago, you were living in a car. I was about to lose this restaurant. Look at us now. We took a risk on each other, and it paid off. Maybe it's time to take another one." Dorothy thought about it for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it. But we do it smart. We start small, see how it goes, and grow from there." "Deal." They spent the next 2 months renovating the space next door. They knocked out a wall to connect it to the restaurant, installed new ovens and mixers, and created a beautiful display case for the pastries. Dorothy insisted on having a small seating area where people could sit and enjoy coffee with their desserts. Tommy helped pick out the paint colors, choosing a warm cream for the walls and a soft blue for the trim. He spent his afternoons after school helping however he could, carefully arranging napkins in holders and polishing the new tables until they gleamed. The grand opening was on a Saturday in late spring. Dorothy had barely slept the night before, worried that nobody would come, that this was all too much, too fast. But when Robert unlocked the doors at 8 in the morning, there was already a line of people waiting outside. By noon, they'd sold nearly everything Dorothy had prepared. By evening, they'd taken orders for custom cakes and pastries worth thousands of dollars. Dorothy stood behind the counter, overwhelmed, watching customer after customer smile as they bit into her creations. One woman, probably in her 70s, came up to Dorothy with tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said. "I read your story in the paper about being homeless, about rebuilding your life. My daughter just lost her job and she's about to lose her apartment. She has 2 kids. I've been so worried about her, feeling helpless. But seeing what you've done, knowing that you came back from that, it gives me hope. It gives her hope, too. I bought her one of your books." She held up a small cookbook Dorothy had put together, filled with some of her favorite recipes. "We're going to bake together this weekend. Make something beautiful even when things are hard." Dorothy hugged the woman, both of them crying. "Tell your daughter she's going to be okay. It might not feel like it now, but she will be. And she's lucky to have a mother who believes in her." After the woman left, Dorothy had to step into the back room for a moment to collect herself. Robert found her there, wiping her eyes. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm better than okay. I just never imagined any of this. A year ago, I was sleeping in a car, wondering how I'd feed Tommy. And now I'm giving people hope. How did this happen?" "It happened because you never gave up, and because you walked into my restaurant on a rainy night and asked for help." "No," Dorothy said, shaking her head. "It happened because you said yes. You didn't have to let us in that night. You didn't have to let us stay. You didn't have to give me a job or make me your partner. You chose kindness when you had every reason to protect yourself. That's what changed everything." Robert smiled. Maybe we both needed saving. As the months went on, Robert and Dorothy's became a landmark in the neighborhood. The restaurant was always busy, the bakery had lines out the door on weekends, and they'd even started supplying pastries to other restaurants and coffee shops in the area. Dorothy moved into a real apartment with Tommy, a two-bedroom place just 3 blocks from the restaurant. For the first time in over a year, Tommy had his own room. He'd decorated it with his drawings, including one of the restaurant that Dorothy had framed and hung on the wall. Tommy was thriving in school. His teacher called Dorothy one afternoon to say he'd been chosen for the advanced art program. He'd made friends, joined the soccer team, and talked constantly about wanting to be a chef like his grandma when he grew up. 1 year after that rainy November night, Robert and Dorothy threw an anniversary party for the restaurant. They invited everyone who'd been part of their journey, the regular customers, the employees, the food blogger who'd written that first article. Even Pedro the dishwasher who'd been sick that fateful day, Dorothy started helping out. Robert stood up to make a toast, tapping his glass with a spoon. "A year ago," he said, "I was at the lowest point of my life. My marriage had ended, my restaurant was failing, and I'd forgotten why I started cooking in the first place. Then 2 people walked through my door on a rainy night, and everything changed." He looked at Dorothy, who was standing next to Tommy, both of them smiling. "Dorothy, you and Tommy didn't just help save this restaurant. You saved me. You reminded me that food isn't just about business or keeping the lights on. It's about bringing people together. It's about creating moments of joy and comfort. It's about family, even when that family isn't related by blood." Dorothy's eyes were shining with tears. "I went into this thinking I was helping you," Robert continued. "But the truth is, you helped me more than I could ever help you. You taught me about resilience, about courage, about never giving up even when everything seems hopeless. So this toast isn't just to celebrate the restaurant. It's to celebrate second chances. It's to celebrate what happens when we choose kindness over convenience, when we open our doors to people who need help, when we believe in each other." Everyone raised their glasses. Dorothy wiped her eyes and raised hers too. "To second chances," Robert said. "To second chances," everyone echoed. Tommy tugged on his grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, can I say something?" Dorothy nodded, lifting him up so everyone could see him. "I just want to say thank you to Mr. Robert," Tommy said in his clear, young voice. "For letting us stay that night when it was raining, for giving Grandma a job, for being our friend. You're like family now." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "You're family too, buddy. Both of you are." Later that night, after all the guests had left and the cleanup was done, Dorothy and Robert stood outside the restaurant, looking up at the sign with both their names on it. "Did you ever imagine this?" Dorothy asked. "A year ago?" "Not in a million years," Robert admitted. "But I'm glad it happened. I'm glad you walked through that door. I'm glad you opened it." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the occasional car drive past, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. Inside, the restaurant was dark and quiet, but it would come alive again tomorrow with the smell of fresh bread and pastries, with the sounds of customers laughing and talking, with the warmth of people coming together over good food. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need at exactly the right moment. Sometimes a single act of kindness, a moment of compassion, can change everything. Robert had opened his door to help 2 people in need, never knowing that in doing so, he was helping himself. Dorothy had asked for 1 night of shelter and received a new life, a new purpose, a new family. And Tommy, who'd lost his mother and nearly lost everything else, learned that even in the darkest times, there are still good people in the world, people who care, people who help, people who become family. That rainy November night had changed all 3 of their lives. It taught them that you never know when your moment will come, when your luck will change, when someone will see you and decide to help. All you can do is keep going, stay hopeful, and be ready to say yes when opportunity knocks. And maybe, just maybe, be that person who opens the door for someone else.